This chart details total human losses during the Second World War. As you can see, more people died on the Eastern Front than in every other theater of the conflict combined. In just one battle, more soldiers perished than the United States lost in the entire war. Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union was driven by Adolf Hitler's ideological quest for Lebensraum, or living space. To secure it, he opened an active combat zone stretching 1,800 miles across Eastern Europe, pushing into territory held by a Soviet military severely weakened by Joseph Stalin's execution of his own officer corps. On June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa began. With 3 million German troops advancing, it remains the largest invasion in human history. The assault devastated Soviet lines in weeks, aided by the fact that Stalin had received 84 separate intelligence warnings about the impending attack and chose to ignore all of them. German armored divisions drove 1,000 miles into Soviet territory, capturing 3 million prisoners by October. Based on the speed of the advance, Western observers concluded that a total Nazi victory in the East was inevitable. That momentum culminated in the fall of 1941 at the Battle of Kiev. German forces completely surrounded the city, capturing 665,000 Soviet soldiers in the largest single military encirclement ever recorded. But capturing Kiev cost the German command valuable time. Hitler had ordered his armored units to divert south to secure the city, rather than maintaining their direct push toward the Soviet capital of Moscow. Further north, the German army severed all supply routes into Leningrad. For 872 days, the city was trapped. Hitler issued explicit orders to starve the population, rather than risk his infantry in a ground assault, leaving 1.5 million civilians to die from hunger and freezing temperatures. Back in the center, the delayed German spearhead finally reached the outskirts of Moscow. They came within 12 miles of the Kremlin, but it was now late autumn. Temperatures dropped to negative 40 degrees Celsius, and the German troops had advanced without winter gear. Soviet General Georgy Zhukov seized on the frozen front. He rapidly deployed fresh, winter-trained Siberian divisions, a maneuver only possible because a Soviet spy in Tokyo, Richard Sorge, confirmed that Japan had no plans to attack Siberia from the east. Zhukov's counterattack pushed the German lines back. Between the lethal winter conditions and accurate intelligence, the German military had finally been stopped. By the summer of 1942, the conflict shifted south to Stalingrad. Over 6 months of brutal, room-to-room urban combat, 2 million soldiers and civilians became casualties. It stands out as the deadliest single battle in human history. Inside the rubble, the Soviet High Command leveraged individual soldiers to maintain Oronol. Snipers like Vasily Zaitsev racked up hundreds of confirmed kills, and the state turned them into heavily publicized symbols of resistance to keep the defensive line from breaking. This map shows the mechanics of Operation Uranus. While German forces exhausted themselves trying to take the city center, the Soviets struck the weaker Romanian and Hungarian units guarding the German flanks, sweeping around in a massive pincer movement.
The German Sixth Army was entirely surrounded. Rather than authorize a tactical retreat to break the encirclement, Hitler ordered his commanders to hold their ground. That decision trapped 300,000 of his own men inside the pocket with no supplies. By February 1943, starvation and frostbite forced a surrender. Commander Friedrich Paulus yielded his remaining forces, making him the first German field marshal in history to be captured. The German army managed a brief tactical recovery shortly after. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein orchestrated a successful counterattack at the Third Battle of Kharkov, which temporarily stabilized the front and gave the German High Command a lethal dose of false confidence. But the total destruction of the Sixth Army at Stalingrad had stripped Germany of the manpower and momentum needed to win the war in Europe. The strategic advantage now belonged to the Soviet Union. Germany's final attempt to regain control occurred in July 1943 at the Battle of Kursk. Featuring 6,000 tanks and 2 million soldiers, it remains the largest armored clash ever fought. Because Soviet intelligence secured the attack details in advance, they built 3 massive defensive lines to absorb the German armor. The panzers bogged down. Panicking over these losses and Allied landings in Sicily, Hitler pulled forces away, permanently ending Germany's eastern offensive capability. The Soviets countered in the summer of 1944 with Operation Bagration. Involving more men and material and the Allied D-Day landings, the offensive rapidly pushed west and completely destroyed the German Army Group center, inflicting 400,000 casualties. To demonstrate the absolute scale of the victory, Soviet leadership marched 57,000 captured German soldiers directly through the streets of Moscow. In 3 years, the Soviet military had evolved from a disorganized defense into an industrialized, highly effective war machine, pushing relentlessly toward German territory. By early 1945, the Vistula-Oder offensive advanced the front line 300 miles in just 23 days. When Soviet troops crossed into German territory, millions of civilians fled the advance, creating the largest refugee crisis in history. The final engagement took place in Berlin. Mathematically, the outcome was guaranteed: 2.5 million heavily armed Soviet soldiers surrounding a desperate defense of 750,000 Germans, many of them hastily conscripted civilians. The high casualty rate of the final push was an active choice. Stalin forced his front commanders to race each other to capture the Reichstag. That internal competition cost 80,000 Soviet lives to take a city that was already effectively beaten, just days before Hitler committed suicide. On May 2, 1945, the remaining German garrison surrendered, and Soviet soldiers hoisted their flag over the ruins of Berlin. Let me know in the comments, which of these battles surprised you the most? And if you want to know exactly who executed these campaigns, subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming breakdown of the top Soviet commanders. The combat on the Eastern Front defeated the German military, but in the process, it redrew the borders of Europe, established Soviet dominance over the eastern half of the continent, and laid the immediate foundation for the Cold War.